Welcome, everyone, to another story from the heart, a tale that's both shocking and deeply moving. Imagine this, a seemingly happy marriage, a loving husband who thinks his life is picture perfect, and a wife he believes is his soulmate. But what happens when that illusion is shattered in an instant? Today, we'll dive into a story that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Meet Daniel, a 52-year-old man who's worked tirelessly to provide for his family. He's the type of man who remembers anniversaries, plans thoughtful surprises, and believes in love's unbreakable bond. His wife, Clara, has always been his biggest cheerleader, or so he thought. One sunny afternoon, Daniel came home earlier than expected. He had wrapped up a meeting ahead of schedule and decided to surprise Clara with a bouquet of her favorite tulips, pink and white, just like she loved. But when he opened the front door, something felt off. The usual warmth of his home seemed absent. He called out, "Clara, are you here?" No answer. Then, from the living room, he heard muffled voices, one of them unmistakably Clara's and the other a man's. Confused but not yet alarmed, Daniel walked in, only to find Clara and her boss in what could only be described as a very compromising situation. The shock hit him like a ton of bricks. This was his home, his sanctuary, and the woman he trusted most in the world. What was going on here? Daniel's heart raced as a storm of emotions flooded his mind. Confusion, betrayal, anger. But Daniel didn't react impulsively. No shouting, no confrontations. Instead, he quietly backed out of the room, his mind already racing with thoughts of what to do next. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a moment that would define the course of his life. Daniel sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly as the weight of what he had just witnessed began to sink in. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, questions without answers. How long had this been going on? What had he done to deserve this? But then, amid the turmoil, a memory surfaced, one that gave him strength. Years ago, his late father had told him, "Son, in moments of great pain, don't act out of anger. Think carefully, because your response will shape your future." Daniel took a deep breath, started the engine, and drove off. He didn't have a plan yet, but one thing was clear. Clara's betrayal wasn't going to break him. It was going to teach him something. The first thing Daniel did was find a quiet place to think. He parked at a nearby park, a spot where he and Clara had often taken evening walks in happier times. The irony wasn't lost on him. As he sat there, staring at the lake, he made a decision, not to confront Clara immediately. Instead, he would gather his thoughts and take the time to process what had happened. This wasn't just about anger, it was about clarity and strength. Later that evening, Daniel returned home. Clara greeted him as if nothing had happened, her voice light and cheerful. She asked about his day, her smile betraying none of the earlier events. Daniel played along, his face a mask of calm. Inside, though, he was observing, analyzing, noting every word, every gesture. That night, as Clara slept, Daniel sat in his study. He opened his laptop and began to dig deeper into what he now realized was an uncomfortable truth. He checked her recent texts, her emails, even her calendar. What he found confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't a one-time mistake. Clara and her boss had been meeting secretly for months. Instead of anger, a strange calm washed over him. He had all the proof he needed. The next step was clear, but Daniel wasn't ready to confront her just yet. No, he wanted to approach this with precision. If Clara had betrayed him so deeply, he needed to respond with dignity, strength, and yes, a little bit of cleverness. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming his life. Over the next few days, Daniel kept up the appearance of normalcy. He smiled at Clara, shared meals with her, and even listened to her stories about work, stories that, more often than not, included mentions of her boss. Each time she brought him up, Daniel felt a pang in his chest but managed to keep his composure. Instead of confronting her, Daniel used the time to prepare. He sought advice from a trusted friend, Mark, who was not only a confidant but also a family lawyer. Mark listened patiently as Daniel recounted the events, offering both emotional support and practical guidance. Daniel, Mark said, "This isn't just about betrayal. It's about protecting yourself. You need to approach this logically, not emotionally. If you want closure, you need to have everything in order before you act." Daniel took Mark's advice to heart. He began documenting everything: the texts, the emails, the calls. He even set up a discreet meeting with a private investigator to ensure that his suspicions were fully validated. It wasn't about revenge. It was about understanding the depth of Clara's deception and making informed decisions for the future. Meanwhile, Clara seemed oblivious to Daniel's inner turmoil. She continued her usual routine, unaware that her husband was quietly unraveling the truth behind her actions. Daniel marveled at her ability to carry on as though nothing had changed. But he didn't let it anger him. Instead, it strengthened his resolve. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Clara mentioned that she had a work trip coming up. She explained that she and her boss needed to visit a nearby city for a conference. Daniel nodded, his expression calm, but inside, he knew this was another lie. "That sounds interesting," he said, his tone measured. "Will it be just the two of you?" Clara hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying, "No, of course not. The whole team will be there." That hesitation was all Daniel needed to confirm his suspicions. As the days passed, Daniel quietly worked on his plan. He wasn't going to lash out or create a scene. Instead, he was going to handle this with grace and precision. He would confront Clara, but on his terms, and in a way that would leave no room for denial or manipulation. Daniel knew that the moment of truth was approaching, and he was ready. The day of Clara's so-called work trip arrived, and Daniel played his part perfectly. He helped her pack, wished her a safe journey, and even gave her a warm hug as she left. But as soon as her car disappeared down the street, Daniel's demeanor shifted. This wasn't just any day. It was the day he would finally uncover the full truth. Daniel had already coordinated with a private investigator who had discreetly followed Clara and her boss over the past few weeks. The evidence was undeniable: photos, timestamps, locations. He even had audio recordings of their conversations in public places, conversations that revealed not just their betrayal, but their arrogance in believing they would never be caught. As Clara left for her trip, Daniel received a real-time update from the investigator. Clara hadn't gone to a conference. She had gone to a luxurious countryside hotel with her boss. The confirmation stung, but Daniel didn't let it overwhelm him. Instead, he focused on the next steps. While Clara was away, Daniel made a few changes at home. He removed personal items that held sentimental value, photos, gifts, and keepsakes, and placed them in a box labeled "Memories No More." He also left a folder on the dining table, filled with the evidence he had gathered. But that wasn't all. Daniel had written a letter, one that expressed his pain, his disappointment, and his decision to move forward without her. It was neither angry nor cruel, just honest. That evening, Daniel called Clara, his voice as calm as ever. "I hope the conference is going well," he said. "When you get back, we need to talk." Clara hesitated for a moment, then replied cheerfully, "Of course, Daniel. I'll be back tomorrow evening. Is everything okay?" "Everything will be," Daniel said, his tone steady but firm. "See you soon." The next day, Clara returned home, completely unaware of what awaited her. She walked through the door, smiling, only to find the folder and the letter on the dining table. Daniel wasn't there. He had gone to stay at a friend's house for the night, giving her the space to absorb what he had uncovered. As Clara read through the evidence and the letter, Daniel's words echoed in her mind. He hadn't resorted to anger or accusations. Instead, he had laid out the truth and drawn a line in the sand. The message was clear: their marriage, as it once was, no longer existed. For Daniel, this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where he would rebuild his life, not as a victim, but as a man who chose dignity and self-respect over anger and bitterness. That night, Daniel found himself reflecting on the journey he'd been forced to take over the past weeks. He was staying at his friend Mark's house, grateful for the space to think and the unwavering support Mark had offered. It wasn't easy to process the emotions swirling within him: betrayal, sadness, and even relief that he had finally confronted the truth. Meanwhile, Clara was at home, reeling from what she had discovered. She read and reread Daniel's letter, each word cutting deeper into her guilt. The evidence was irrefutable. There was no denying what she had done, no excuse that could undo the damage. She tried calling Daniel several times, but he didn't answer. For Daniel, the silence wasn't about punishment. It was about protecting his peace. He needed time to decide what his future would look like, and he wasn't going to let Clara's explanations cloud his judgment. Instead, he focused on grounding himself. The following morning, Daniel woke up early and decided to take a walk. The crisp air and quiet streets felt refreshing, almost symbolic of the fresh start he was determined to embrace. As he walked, he thought about the years he had spent building a life with Clara. He thought about the good times, the laughter, and the dreams they had once shared. But most of all, he thought about how those dreams had been shattered, not by an external force, but by Clara's choices. By the time he returned to Mark's house, Daniel felt a sense of clarity. He knew what he needed to do next. Later that day, Daniel agreed to meet Clara. She suggested they talk at the house, but Daniel chose a neutral location, a small cafe they had visited during their early years of dating. It was a place that once symbolized joy and togetherness, but now served as the backdrop for a much-needed conversation. Clara was already seated when Daniel arrived. She looked nervous, her usual confident demeanor replaced with apprehension. As Daniel sat across from her, she began to speak, her voice trembling. "Daniel, I don't even know where to start. I've made a terrible mistake, and I know I've hurt you deeply." Daniel listened quietly, his expression unreadable. He let her speak, not interrupting as she apologized and tried to explain her actions. But when she finished, he took a deep breath and said, "Clara, I appreciate your apology, but this isn't just about what you did. It's about trust, respect, and the foundation of our marriage. That foundation is gone, and I need to focus on rebuilding my life without you." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but Daniel remained calm. He wasn't there to argue or to punish. He was there to close a chapter that had already ended. As the conversation drew to a close, Daniel stood up and said, "I wish you well, Clara. But this is where our journey together ends." With that, he walked away, feeling a strange mix of sadness and liberation. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was finally reclaiming his life. After the conversation with Clara, Daniel felt a sense of closure that had eluded him for weeks. The weight of betrayal still lingered, but it no longer consumed him. He was ready to move forward, not as a man defined by heartbreak, but as someone determined to rebuild his life with purpose and dignity. The next step was practical divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but Daniel knew it was the right one. With Mark's guidance, he filed the necessary paperwork and began the legal process. Clara didn't contest his decision. Perhaps she understood that her actions had left no room for reconciliation. But this wasn't just about ending a marriage. For Daniel, it was about rediscovering who he was outside the relationship. He threw himself into the things he had neglected over the years, his hobbies, his friendships, and even his health. He started painting again, something he hadn't done since his 20s. The canvas became his sanctuary, a place where he could pour his emotions and find solace. At the same time, Daniel sought community. He joined a local support group for people navigating divorce and betrayal. At first, he was hesitant. He wasn't sure if sharing his story with strangers would help. But as he listened to others recount their journeys, he realized he wasn't alone. Their resilience inspired him, and his story, in turn, became a source of encouragement for others. One evening, during a support group meeting, a woman named Evelyn approached him. She was in her 50s, kind-eyed, and soft-spoken. She shared her story of overcoming heartbreak, and the two quickly struck up a friendship. Evelyn's perspective was refreshing. She didn't dwell on the past, but instead focused on the possibilities of the future. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel found himself smiling more, laughing more, and worrying less. He learned to let go of the what-ifs and embrace the what-now. His journey wasn't without challenges, but each step forward felt like a victory. Clara, meanwhile, reached out once or twice, apologizing again and expressing regret. But Daniel kept his boundaries firm. He knew forgiveness was important, but reconciliation wasn't. He had already chosen a path that didn't include looking back. One day, as Daniel stood in front of a finished painting, a vibrant depiction of a sunrise, he felt a profound sense of peace. The sunrise, he realized, was a metaphor for his life. Just as the sun rises after the darkest night, he was emerging from his own darkness, ready to embrace the light of a new beginning. Daniel had learned that while betrayal could break your heart, it didn't have to break your spirit. And as he stepped into his future, he carried with him a newfound strength, knowing that life, even after the deepest hurt, could still be beautiful. In the weeks that followed, Daniel fully embraced his fresh start. Life, as unpredictable as it had been, now felt like an open book with blank pages waiting to be filled. The scars of betrayal were still there, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of his resilience and growth. Daniel poured his energy into meaningful pursuits. He volunteered at a local art center, teaching painting classes to seniors, a community he found particularly inspiring. Their laughter and stories brought him a sense of belonging and purpose he hadn't felt in years. In helping others find joy through art, Daniel rediscovered his own. One Saturday morning, as he was setting up an easel for a new class, Evelyn walked in with a shy smile. She had decided to join his class, curious to see the world through Daniel's eyes. Over the weeks, their friendship deepened, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. There was no rush, no expectations, just two people enjoying each other's company, finding comfort in the simple act of being present. One day, during a quiet moment, Evelyn said, Daniel, I used to think that heartbreak was the end of the story. But meeting you has shown me that it's just a chapter. Life has so much more to offer if we're willing to turn the page. Her words resonated deeply with Daniel. They weren't just words of encouragement. They were a reflection of the journey he had taken. He realized that while Clara's betrayal had marked the end of one chapter, it had also paved the way for new beginnings, ones filled with hope, passion, and connection. Months turned into a year, and Daniel found himself thriving in ways he never thought possible. His paintings began to draw attention, and he held a small exhibition at the art center. Friends, old and new, came to celebrate his work, and among them was Evelyn, her pride in him unmistakable. As Daniel looked around the room that evening, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life hadn't gone the way he had planned, but it had brought him to a place of healing and renewal. He had learned to let go of bitterness and embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. Standing beside Evelyn, Daniel raised a glass of sparkling water and said, "To new beginnings, to growth, and to the beauty of turning the page." The room erupted in applause, but Daniel's smile wasn't just for the crowd. It was for himself, for the man he had become, for the life he had reclaimed, and for the reminder that even after the stormiest nights, the sun always rises again.